In this section, we are going to discuss about AAA, and mainly we will focus on the configuration that we can do on our Cisco devices related to the AAA or Tacacs. In our previous section, if you remember or if you have watched that particular video that I have created on privilege levels, we discussed about the default and custom privilege levels. Also, we discussed that privilege levels do not support arguments and they have scalability issues. So, if you are not familiar with privilege levels, then I would suggest you to go and watch that particular video that I had created on privilege levels. Then it will be easy for you to follow this particular video on AAA. So AAA stands for authentication, authorization, and accounting. Authentication is that who is the user, right? We are providing the username and password. So our AAA or our TechX server is going to check if that particular user is valid or not. Then we have authorization. Authorization is basically the privilege level that will be given to that authenticated user. Then we have the accounting is nothing but keeping track of everything. Who is the user, at what time that particular user log into the device, what are the command that he or she run on that particular device. So basically we are doing the accounting of the login plus the commands that a user is running on that particular device. By default, AAA is disabled on our Cisco routers and switches. But if you talk about the Cisco ASA, because that is our security appliance, so on that particular device, AAA is by default enabled. So to the command to check AAA, you can just simply say show run on your Cisco router or switches. Let's go through a brief history about AAA, because as we know that we have the protocol TechX Plus, and most of us, we are not aware about why we have given this particular plus with the TechX, not just the TechX. Okay, so um, when we are trying to access a particular device, right, we need to provide the username and password. So the detail that are we are providing to that particular device, let's say I have one PC and I'm telnetting router 1. So when I'm telnetting router 1, I'll provide the username and password. So my router or the router 1, it is going to send that particular information to the TechX server to check if that particular username and password combination is correct. Then the TechX server is going to check its database. If the username and password is correct, so TechX server is going to send back the result to the router that okay, this particular user is valid. If the username and password combination is incorrect, then also the TechX server is going to send back the reply to the router that the username and password is incorrect. So for all this process, the carrying the username and password from the router to the AAA server and carrying back the result from the TechX server or AAA server to the router or switch, we need some protocol. And the protocol that is responsible for this particular task is TechX Plus for Cisco devices, because TechX Plus is Cisco proprietary. It works on port number TCP port number 49. If you have a non-Cisco devices, let's say you are working on Juniper or maybe HP, then there you can use Radius, which is open standard, and it works on UDP. Now, as we discussed that why there is a plus in the TechX name. So there was one company named BBN Technologies. So that particular company developed TechX protocol that was used for remote authentication through some centralized servers. Later on, this particular protocol was used by the Department of Defense. In 1980s, Cisco products also started supporting TechX, but Cisco keep on doing some modification on that, and they released several extension of that. Um and in 1990s, they developed XTechX, which was Cisco proprietary, but there was no backward compatibility on this particular protocol with the original TechX or with the original protocol. Later on, finally in 1993, Cisco developed a new protocol called TechX Plus that we are going to discuss today, right? That handles authentication, authorization, and accounting. Now, let's see how we can configure the AAA or TechX on our Cisco devices. So we will use a simple topology wherein we have a PC from where we are going to access this particular router R13, and we have a TechX server. It is not a TechX server actually. This is a simple router, and I just changed the icon of it. Basically, our main focus is to see how we can configure the TechX on the router or switches on Cisco devices, right? So the IP schema is quite simple. We are using a multi-access network wherein we have the PC having IP 10.1.1.1, 10.1.1.2 is configured on the router, and the TechX server is having an IP address of 10.1.1.3. Now let's go to router 13. Okay, so I'm on router 13, and if I do a show running configuration, now you can see by default AAA is disabled, right? Also, you can see that on line VTY also I just typed login, but I did not specify any password. If I go to, let's say, PC, and if I say telnet the router which is having IP 10.1.1.2, it is saying, or we are getting the message that password is required but none set. But now let's see. If I say AAA new model. This is the first command that is required to enable AAA. Okay, AAA new model. Now, if I go back to PC, and now if I telnet, you can see that though there is no password under line VTY, still it is asking the username. So it means that AAA it works on the username and password combination, right? Now let's move back. So now let's start configuring AAA. So also you can see there is no username and password configure. If I do a show run pipe include username, there is no username and password configure. So let's configure the username Cisco privilege 15, password Cisco. So our username is capital letter Cisco, password normal Cisco, small letter. Now, so we have already configured this command, right? AAA new model. Now we will configure the IP of our TechX server. So we'll say TechX server host, the IP of TechX server, right? You can also change the port number here. Okay. By default, as you know that the port number that the protocol or the TechX Plus protocol uses is 49. If you want to change it, you can change it with the this particular keyword. You can, let's say, 78 or something, anything that you want to configure. And then we need to define a key to encrypt and decrypt our communication between our router and our TechX server. So now, so far, we have configured two commands, right, for AAA. We enabled AAA. Then we have configured the Tacacs server, right? The IP address of Tacacs server and the key that will be used for encryption and decryption of our communication between a router and the Tacacs server. Now we'll say AAA authentication login default. So here default means that, see, when we are accessing any device, so we can access the particular device via, maybe we can use the console method, right? We can use a console cable and we can access to that particular device. We can get access to that device, or we can access the device remotely. We can using the VTY lines, right? We can do a telnet or SSH to that particular device, or we can use the auxiliary lines to access the device. So default mean we are applying this particular configuration to all those processes. Okay, it is not that this particular authentication, triple authentication, we are applying to only VTY or maybe console or maybe aux. We'll see that process also, that let's say if I want to enable a AAA on the line VTY only, then what we can do in that case. So first of all, we'll see for all those processes, okay, the default one. So the command is AAA authentication login default group. So the default group will be TechX, or this is a kind of sequence that first of all the authentication, the login authentication will be checked via TechX server, right? If let's say your TechX server is dead or not reachable, then what is the second method that your device is going to check for the authentication? So you can type local. It means that if your TechX server is not reachable by any reason, then your local database will be checked for your username and password. If it is there, then you'll be able to then you'll be authenticated by the router or R13. Then after authentication, we have authorization. AAA authorization exec default group TechX plus. See, whenever we access any device, so by default, when you access, let's say I'm telnetting a device at 10.1.1.1. So I put the correct username and password. As soon as I put the correct username and password, the device is going to provide me some privilege level. There are default privilege levels, right? That we already discussed in our previous video. So you can go and watch that. But my point is that as soon as you are authenticated, you will be assigned some privilege level. So this command means that as soon as you are authenticated, what privilege level you will be given. Okay. So again, we are using default keyword. It means that this is for all the process that we discussed to log into the device. So this authorization is for the console access also, for telnet and SSH also, or for auxiliary port access also. So the authorization or the privilege level that will be given once the user is authenticated, it will be checked first from TechX Plus. If TechX is not reachable, then we can use what? We'll use local database, right? To provide the privilege level once the user is authenticated. Now, what we want that for all default privilege levels, we are going to uh, check with the TechX server if that particular user is allowed to run that particular command or not. Okay, as soon as you are running any command, let's say you type show run. So your router is going to create some packet. It is going to send it to the AAA or Tacacs server. Tacacs server is going to check its database if that particular user is allowed to run show run or not. If yes, then he will accept that particular query. It is going to reply that okay, that particular user can run show run. Then you can run it. If let's say you're running some command, let's say you're running router BGP 1 2 3 4 5 6, something like that. Okay, then your router is going to send this particular information to the TechX server that use this particular user, he or she wants to run a router BGP command, right? So your TechX or AAA server is going to check the database if that particular user is allowed to run that command or not. If not, then your command will be rejected. You'll not be able to run router BGP. Okay. So basically, these configuration that we are going to configure right now, these are the same thing that for all the default privilege levels, we are going to check with the TechX server if that particular user is allowed to run those command or not. Okay. So AAA authorization command 00 is the default privilege level. Default group is TechX. If TechX is not there, you can use local database. Similarly, will configure for privilege level 1. Again, I will say if you're not familiar with privilege levels, go and watch that previous video. Then otherwise, if you are not aware, it will be confusing for you that why we are configuring these, these three commands. Okay. I mean, if you talk about your TechX servers, so there you do not use custom privilege levels that we discussed in our previous videos. Okay, there because we can configure the arguments in TechX servers, so you can directly configure what are the commands that a particular user can run. So by default, I mean, we can give just 15 privilege to a particular user, and then we can define what are the commands that particular user can run. So these are the commands that we have to configure for authorization. Then we can say accounting exec. It means accounting exec mean that we need the information about who is logging into this particular device. Okay, so all the user that are going to log in into the device, the AAA or the TechX server is going to keep a track of that. Okay, so I will just copy paste all these commands for accounting. My main focus is on configuring authentication and authorization because accounting is simple. So for accounting, so the first command is for the users, right, who are going to log into the device, and then again for all the privilege levels, whatever commands they are running on the device, then the information will be sent to the AAA server, so that we can check at what particular time on a particular device who logged into the device and what are the commands that particular user run. Okay, so now if I do a show run, so you can see that these are the commands that we configured so far, right? First one for authentication, then we have authorization and accounting. Now let's see if I do a show run pipe include username. So we have configured the username CISCO and privilege level 15 and password CISCO. If I go to the PC, if I do a telnet 10.1.1.2, so first of all, it is going to check if our TechX server is reachable or not. Now, because we do not have the TechX server, you can see I'm able to access the device via what? Via the local username and password, correct? And also you can see that though we have used the capital letter in Cisco, but as you know that the username is not case sensitive, so we can use small letters also. So now we are able to access the device. Now what I want to show you is that this particular command is very important. Now let's try to do some modification in this command. So as I told you that once a user is authenticated, it will be given some privilege level. Okay, let's say if you do not use this keyword local, right? Now let's see what happens. First let's exit. So I'm trying to telnet the device. I will say Cisco password Cisco. Now you can see the error that I'm getting is authorization failed. Now some of you may think that why we are getting this error, because first of all there is authentication and we are providing the correct username and password. After authentication there should be authorization, right? But the thing is that as I told you a few minutes before also, that whenever you are accessing a device, let's say you are telnetting a device, so you put the good or the correct username and password. Once you put the good username and password, the device is going to provide you some privilege level. And now because in this command you are saying that to provide the privilege level, where we need to go, we need to go to the Tacacs server, but we do not have any Tacacs server, right, to respond right now. That is why the device is not able to provide us any privilege level, right? That is the case that we are getting this particular error. Earlier, what we have done with this particular command, what we have said that, okay, once the user is authenticated, first go to the Tacacs server. If Tacacs server is not live, you can check the local database to provide the privilege. Now let's try again. I will say Cisco. Now you can see that now I am able to access. One more thing I want to show you before we move to the next configuration. We configure the authentication. So instead of local, we can use a keyword local case. Okay, if I do a show run, so you can see that instead of using local keyword after text, we can use local case. It means that this time you have seen that earlier we were typing Cisco as a username in small letters, though if you see on the device we configured it in capital letters, right? This time using this particular keyword, if you do not provide the same username which is configured on this device, it is not going to allow us, or it is not going to authenticate us. So now our username is case sensitive using this particular keyword local case. Now let's try again. If I am on PC, exit. First of all, I'm going to type in small letter Cisco. Let's wait. You can see that now authentication is failed because we are using Cisco in small letters. But we have configured the keyword in AAA, that is local case. Now our username is case sensitive. Let's try with the correct one. Cisco capital and the password. Now you can see we are able to access the device. So this is how the AAA configuration works on our Cisco devices. Now let's see one more case wherein in this scenario we have the local username and password configured on our device, right? We have the username Cisco, password Cisco. There may be a case wherein we do not have the username and password configured on our local database, right? So in that case, what we can do? Let's find out. So now let's remove the username and password. So I have removed it, right? Also, I have removed all the commands related to AAA. Only one command is left, that is AAA new model. Now let's configure some password under, let's say, VTY 0 to 15. I will say password, and let's say password is CCIE. Also, let's say enable password CCIE. Now you can see we do not have any password, I mean any username configured, right? Now let's see how we can configure AAA. So we'll type AAA authentication login default group. The first option is, or our first priority is that for authentication go to Tacacs server, right? Now the second option is that because right now we do not have any local database, so we cannot use local keyword, right? We do not have local username and password. So instead what we can say, okay, if Tacacs is not reachable, use the password under line VTY. Okay, then AAA authentication, sorry, AAA authorization exec default group Tacacs plus, right? For authorization, now we are saying for authorization, once the user is authenticated, go to Tacacs plus. If Tacacs plus is not live, then we can use this keyword if authenticated. If user is already authenticated, then provide in the authorization. This is what the meaning of if authenticated, right? Because as we discussed that user is in our previous section also, user was already authenticated, but we provided the keyword local so that some privilege level can be given to the user, right? Now because we do not have any local username and password configured, so we are telling the device that if TechX is not live or not reachable, then just give him the privilege level, right? According to what you have configured. Okay. In this kind of scenario, you can configure the privilege level under the line VTY. You can just say line VTY 0 to 15, privilege 15, right? Something like that. Okay, first let's complete this and then I'll configure the privilege level under VTY and all. So for group you have configured, then for command 0 default group Tacacs plus, So for all privilege levels or default privilege levels, we will say this one, right? So if user is already authenticated, provide in the authorization, right? I'm not going to configure accounting because our main focus is on authentication and authorization. Let's see our configuration so far. So we have configured the authentication, and if Tacacs is not live, the password under line VTY will be checked. For authorization, we have configured these 4 commands. Now, what we can do under line VTY 0 to 15, we'll set some password, let's say CCIE, we'll say privilege level 15. Okay. Again, you can verify in the running configuration, we do not have any username, no local database. Now let's go to PC. I will say exit. We'll try again. And now you can see that it is not asking about the username because in the configuration, we said that if TechX server is not reachable, check the password under line VTY. So what was the password? It was CCIE, right? We'll type the password CCIE, right? And now we can access the device. So this is another method wherein we can configure AAA or TechX. Now, in this particular example, if you will use local instead of if authenticated, then your configuration is not going to work, right? Because for authorization, your device is going to check the local database, but in the local database we did not configure any username and password that is having some kind of privilege, right? So if you have this kind of configuration wherein you do not have any username and password configured, and you have just a simple password under line VTY, or maybe you have some uh, enable password, you can see that we have already configured enable password also. Enable password is also CCI. So when we give this command AAA authentication login default group TechX plus, so earlier we have given this keyword local when there was local database. For case sensitive, we have given local case. For the password to be checked under line VTY, we can give this keyword line. And if you want to uh, check the enable password instead of the line or maybe the local database, you can give this keyword also. So if you type this one, then once you put the enable password, you'll be able to log in. For example, telnet CCIE, and now we are able to access the device. So this is how uh, you can configure the TechX or AAA on your Cisco devices. We discussed 2 cases, one wherein we have a local database, another one wherein we do not have the local database, but we have some kind of enable password or some line VTY password, right? Now we will discuss about the custom uh, or the user defined uh, groups. So for example, first of all, let's remove these commands. I'll remove all these, and then we will see, because see, as we discussed that when we are using the default keyword, it is working for all the access, like the console access, the access via the auxiliary port, or maybe we are doing a remote access via telnet or SSH. But let's say if we want to apply this AAA or the TechX under VTY only, that if someone access this particular device via the VTY lines, via the telnet or SSH, only then use this particular AAA or TechX method. Okay, if someone is using console, you don't need the AAA. Okay, so how you can achieve that? First of all, let's check show running configuration. All the other concepts will be same, right? That we discussed, like the after the TechX plus, we need to put the local keyword or local case or enable. Everything will be same. The only thing that will be changed, okay, I think one command is left. We can also remove this. Again, let's verify show running configuration. Okay, now we have only AAA new model. So now what we can do, we'll say AAA authentication login. So instead of default, you can see if you type a question mark, instead of default, we can use some keyword here. Let's say I type VTY access. Okay, we want to apply AAA for line VTY only. If someone is trying to access the device remotely via telnet or SSH, only then use AAA. Okay, so rest of the command will be same, like this one, local. And when we are doing the authorization, we will say AAA authorization exec. Here also we'll use the keyword. Instead of default, earlier we used to type something like that, right? Default group something, but this time we will type the custom name VTY, and then we'll type group TechX plus local. For all those commands, we'll say command 0, then we will say this one group TechX plus local. So for similarly for commands 1, 15, all the privilege level, we will use this keyword. Okay, now the second configuration that we have to do now is we'll go under VTY, because this particular configuration or this AAA, we want to enable for the line VTY access only when someone is trying to access the device remotely. So we will say line, sorry, login, authentication, and the name that we have defined for authentication, right? Authentication and authorization, we have defined the same name. And then here we'll say authorization exec and then the name. Similarly, for all the commands that you configured, authorization command 0, name, right? For 1, you can see that it is giving us warning that we did not configure uh, the this particular custom name for the privilege level 1. You can see that we configured till privilege level 0 only. Okay, that is why it is giving us error. But the main point is that whenever we are creating this custom name instead of using default, so under that particular, for example, let's say we want to do authentication for only for console access, so you can go to line console 0, and similar configuration you have to do here, login authentication and this type of this one. So this is the main idea behind using the default configuration and the custom one. Okay. Also, one more thing that let's say you are on this particular router. Okay. On the TechX server, you have configured your username and password, right? So you have some username and password on your TechX server through which you log into all of your devices in your network, correct? So you can test your username and password if it is working properly. For example, test you can I mean not only your username and password, you can test any username and password that is configured on the TechX server. If that combination is working, or if that combination is configured on the TechX server, the TechX server will reply with a success message. You can see on the screen a success message, and if that particular username and password is not configured on the TechX server, you will see that it will reply that this particular combination is not working. For example, the command that you can run is test AAA group TechX plus. Then you need to give a, let's say my username on the TechX server is Pankaj. Okay. And my password is, let's say, Pankaj at 57391. Then I will say legacy. I will say enter. Now you can see attempting authentication test to server this using TechX plus. No authoritative response from the server. If because in our scenario, as you know, that there is no TechX server, right? But if in your production environment, if you'll test this, then for sure you'll get some reply with a success message that okay, this particular username and password is working. So, and also you can try with some username and password that is not configured on the TechX server. Then you'll get the response that that particular username and password is not configured. You will get some error message for sure. Okay. So this is the way you can test a particular username and password if it is configured on the TechX server. So this is the command. Okay. So this was all about AAA and TechX configuration on your Cisco devices. One more thing before we close today's discussion. So in your live environment, if you are configuring, let's say, this TechX configuration on your devices. So um, if your device, the device that you are working on, is already configured in your TechX server, okay. So I would suggest you, if I go to the router, for example, you see what are the commands, total commands that are right there on our device. We have this command, sorry, we have AAA new model, we have these particular commands related to authentication, authorization, and accounting, and then under line VTY, if you are using custom one, you will be having these commands, okay. And you have the, if I do a show run, so you have this TechX server IP configured, okay. So in your production environment, if your device is already configured, okay, with the IP address of your device, okay. If you're this particular device, let's say this is, you are working on this particular device, router 13, okay, and this router 13 configuration is already done on ICE, maybe whatever you are using for the AAA on the TechX server. If this device configuration is already done, then make sure that you give this particular command at the end, because there is a possibility that if you configure this particular command at the I mean at the beginning, and then you'll start the other command, then you'll start configuring other commands related to AAA authentication, authorization, you may lose access, okay. There is a possibility that you lose access because your device, as your device is already configured on the ICE or on the TechX server, then your device will start communicating with the TechX server for authorization and all, and you may lose access. You'll not be able to access the device remotely, and then you need someone to provide you the console access. So always make sure that when you are configuring the device in production environment, um, configure this particular command which is having the IP address of Tacacs server at last. Okay. Also, if you are using some different IP on your router, you can also give this command IP Tacacs source interface. So you may have given some particular IP on your TechX server that for this router 13, that router 13 will come with this particular IP. Okay, so you can configure, maybe you have some loopback or anything, so you have to use that particular interface as source. Okay, otherwise there is a possibility that maybe you configured a different interface or different IP on the TechX server, and here the router, it is using the some exit interface IP. Maybe you have configured the loopback IP on the router, and the same loopback IP is configured on the TechX server, but you did not configure this command. Let's say source interface loopback, right? IP TechX source interface loopback 0. Then it is going to take the exit interface IP using the SAF, whatever is the next hop, right? So make sure if you are using a different IP address on the TechX server for this particular router or switch, then configure it using this command IP TechX source interface and the interface name. Okay. So that was all about AAA or TechX configuration on the Cisco devices. I hope you enjoy this video, and thanks for watching.